Good morning, John. Just got off the boat. Well, I'm not even on yet, probably. Hey, John, good morning. I'm glad you made it. I'll be here in an hour, no worries. Trust me, it'll take me way longer than that. It's going to take me the first 30 minutes to get over being embarrassed that I had the date wrong. Or not the date, but the anniversary date. I kept saying 75th anniversary. I was all excited. It's the 82nd anniversary. What's the matter with me? Math's hard for bears, especially in Tennessee. Did you do any good this morning, John, on the boat? I'm assuming you were fishing. See right here is the problem. This bear, see how many toes? Not enough to do 82. I hope somebody's on here besides me. John, if you're the only one that shows up today. Hey, Chuck, good morning. I was hoping somebody else would make it. Nico, good morning. I had to leave jail, but I hung around just long enough to see him taste that cinnamon roll, Nico. I had to know if it was any good. Oh, me. Oh, I think I'm solo today. I think my running mate's got family over. I believe he said that this weekend had something to do with graduations and birthdays. It did look good, Nico. I'm telling you, it had. I mean, it had at least four food groups there. You had a waffle, you had caramel sauce or syrup. It had pecans. It had bacon. There's probably something else in there too. I mean, how could you go wrong? You don't have to tell your doctor everything. Oh, me. I hope everyone's well. How's the weather in Arizona, Nico? And New York, Chuck? How's the weather up your way? Tina says it's a rainy day in central New York, so the hounds are quiet. That's better than muddy. Muddy hounds are worse than quiet hounds every time. Good morning, Tina. It is a beautiful day, sunny, blue skies, a few puffy clouds here in upper East Tennessee, but it's probably going to get hot. Going to be warm 105. Yeah, I'm not going. I can't say too much. I can't complain too much about the temp here anymore. Not when it's 105 and it's just now 1st of June. According to my trusty phone, it is 75, and it looks like it's going to be mid 80s today. Yeah. I just think it stayed in the 70s. I think summer's here though. I don't think. Yeah, it's a dry heat. Good morning, Mary Ellen. It's a dry heat, Nico, and that does help. I mean, I know the sun's still super intense and very hot, and it'll burn you to crisp, but that lack of humidity makes a big does make a big difference. You had your weekly rest and nice weather yesterday. I don't know. We had a couple of weeks while I was gone. It was rainy a lot. Brenda said it rained almost every day. But before that, we were starting to get pretty droughty and dry. The lakes weren't full, and I noticed some of the creeks were running pretty low, so we needed the rain. But now it's I don't know if it's rained since I got back, so it maybe it's me. So what's the weather like in Oklahoma? Oklahoma, where the I don't know something about the wind across the plain, and I can't remember the line. So if you saw my thumbnail, you know that I can't do math. Math has gotten harder as I get older. Somewhere I got it in my head that this was the 75th anniversary of D-Day, which is today. And I realized this morning, no, that's not. It's the 82nd anniversary of D-Day. I don't know where I got 75. I read it somewhere yesterday, and then it stuck in my head. I saw something that said 75th anniversary of D-Day from, how many years ago? 7 years ago. And I didn't do the math myself. That's what you get for not doing. I should have done the math. I should have done the math instead of trusting the internet. So you can't trust everything you read on the internet. It could be outdated. Oh, me. I hope my spousal unit does make it, but I don't know if she will or not. She was sick yesterday, so she's not feeling well yesterday, so I don't know if she'll make it today or not. I can't either. Do you think it has to do with how far away we get from school? Tina, that's a good theory. I don't know if I want to say that out loud, but yeah, that's probably pretty good. Because I'm a whole lot further away from school today than I was yesterday. I feel like I'm a long ways from even going back to school. Yeah, I do too. I hope she gets feeling better. I wasn't I wasn't very kind to her last night. I was fussy because she was sick. I feel like she's been sick a lot lately, and I'm worried about her. I think, which bothers me. We'll just see if she's awake, even though I can't. She may not hear her phone. Hmm. Hey, are you feeling any better? Uh, you're live on the show. I'm live on the show. You're not live on the show. Everybody said they hope you feel better. Okay. Well, if you feel like hopping on, I'm here. And you can laugh at my math. I did my math wrong. So, anyway, bye. Well, she sounds better. Let me take these off. I'm echoing in my head. Hang on a minute. Or if I have them on, I don't sound like it somehow doesn't make me sound like I'm the only one in the room, which I am. But I don't have anybody to talk to. Man, there's something all over my glasses just doing that. We can't hear you. Wait a minute. We can't hear you though, Brenda, so you can swear at him for waking you up. Oh, trust me, she'll let me know. She does seem, she said she sounds better, so that's good. I hope she's feeling better. She may pop in. We'll see. Chloe might get her up. Chloe got up this morning and I fed her, so Brenda didn't have to. Well, thank you, Mary Ellen. I do too. I don't know what it looks like on your end. To me, it's. I think it's supposed to be It's supposed to be some kind of a brick color or red or clay color, maybe. But online, I wonder if it doesn't look salmon color or something. It's almost Tennessee orange. I'm not going to say it's Texas orange because that'd be a blasphemy in this state anyway. It looks like a salmon. See, Brenda says it looks salmon colored. It doesn't look salmon colored to me. And I'm pretty sure Duluth Trading says it's supposed to be some kind of clay color. I can probably find that out for sure. I'm basically a walking billboard for Duluth Trading. That's about the only thing. All my clothes seem to come from there anymore, which is fine because I don't think I've worn out a pair of their pants yet, and I've been wearing them for years. And these shirts last forever too. And they're longer, so they don't pull out if you have to tuck them in. They stay in real well. There's all kinds of good things about them. They're not cheap, however. That says Fiesta Orange. I know that's not right. They probably don't make this color anymore since I like it. Ooh, there's a bright green. See, I like yellow, and I like certain greens. I don't think. Oh, maybe this is it. Yeah, they call it dusted clay, CLAY, and I don't know. I just like it. Hey, Carol, welcome in. You're on Zoom with your daughter on my laptop, but I'm listening in. Well, thank you for listening in. Say hi to your daughter for us. And, she's welcome to join us too, and we can just all talk. Construction orange. Chuck likes those colors too. Thank you, Chuck. That's a good, I'll go for that. It's one of the few shirts I've got that I haven't ruined by getting something all over yet. One of my new shirts I got ink on. I was filling up one of my fountain pens not long ago, and I looked down and there was a big old ink spot on my shirt. Needless to say, I was upset with myself. That coffee's good this morning. Well, sometimes it's good to be seen. When I ride my motorcycle, I always wear bright colors and keep lots of lights on because I believe in being conspicuous on the road. Too many people. I've known a couple of people got hurt bad because the car said, I didn't see you coming, or I didn't see you stop. I used to put flashers on my tail light so when I hit my brakes, they flash at you. It gets people's attention. Well, thank you, Tina. I like this too. I made this more or less for the show, but I never have, made any extras. Maybe I'll make some extras and give them away or something. But it was just kind of something I put together. Because, most of you know I'm kind of an owl freak on top of being a bear guy. Her Zoom is with the art fair committee, so she can say, oh, cool. Well, if she has art to sell, maybe she should show us sometime. Maybe we'd like to get in on that. I got something at 6 o'clock this morning. Something of my daughter's popped up on my phone, and of course I realized after I did that I'm sure she wasn't awake. I'm sure it was just maybe somebody else had posted to her or said something about it. I was looking to see what I was going to see if I could find it. Holy mackerel, what is that? No doubt AI. Well, I'm probably not going to find it again. Oh, no. Tree across the road. Bad cracker. Oh, we were excited. We got excited yesterday. Brenda and I were, I guess we were sitting in the living room. I hadn't gotten out here yet. We were watching something on TV, and all of a sudden these cars go roaring by, one, boom, 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 one right after another. And a little bit later, here they go again, or another group, I assume, and they were Mustangs. And we looked it up, and there's a rally going on here locally, and actually in Kingsport, and they're calling it Mustangs in the Mountains or something like that. And because I knew it was a rally because when the cars went by, they all had a big magnetic number sticker on the side of their car, so each car had a number. And I looked it up. It was going to be. I think it actually started Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and ends tomorrow. And they had a run each day. They were doing a different mountain road through the mountains and back, which sounds like a lot of fun. Actually, motorcycle people do that kind of rallies too, where they get together and then they ride hither and yon. And well, they could have been Nico. That's always possible. But if they did, I wouldn't put a number on my car because that'd make it me easier to catch and find. But there was quite a few of them went roaring by here yesterday. And if you're a car guy, I'll have to admit they sounded really good. Yes, Tina, I agree. Um, but but it looked like fun. I actually did. We had a Mustang one time for a while, but it was one of the models that you don't. It was one of them when they downsized them, and I'm not even sure Mustang people consider that a real Mustang. So I probably couldn't be. I couldn't count that. I don't even know if Brendan remembers that car or not. It was silver. Well, wasn't it silver? I think it was silver. I liked it, but it had special wheels on it. The model it was a sport model of some sort, some package that came with from the factory, and the tires on it there was only one tire that would fit those wheels, and only one company that made those tires. And of course, they charged extra for them because they were special. They were Michelin's, and they were good tires, but boy, I had to pay a lot more for them. I remember that. It's one of the reasons I sold it. Yes, it had a stick shift. We had several stick shift cars back in those days because we could both drive them. Well, I say I could drive them, and you drove them too because you learned how to drive them. Um, but you didn't like to as much. I'd love to have a manual shift car. You can't hardly buy one anymore. I was talking to somebody just the other day about that, and they had been looking around for a standard shift car. I know Phil, my buddy Phil, he doesn't want anything with an automatic transmission, and his legs are still good enough he can use a clutch. That's why I don't have one now. I'd like to get a pickup truck, but I don't know if I can shift it with my leg not working. Unfortunately, that's my clutch leg. Yeah, that's true, Nico. But that never bothered me. I drove some delivery trucks and things like that were all stick shift in the mountains on the hills. I just learned to drive them, so it didn't bother me. But and I enjoy driving a stick. Like I said, I can't. Yes, we had a truck. I taught Brendan how to drive my big truck. It was a 4-wheel drive and had a stick, and it was a straight shift. And she didn't like to drive it. I guess I get that. It was a little bit more intimidating. Me too, Nico. The first car I ever drove was a stick, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing when I got in it. Um, in fact, I'm not even going to tell you what age I was because I was probably too young to be driving it. I know I didn't have a driver's license, but he let me drive it just down the road. We kind of lived out in the country anyway, so it probably wasn't that big a deal. But and I was hooked after that. Of course, I was riding motorcycles by then too. I think so. I knew the principle of push in clutch, shift gear, let out clutch, that kind of stuff. But it was different. And my first car was a Triumph TR4, and it was a straight shift. And so I drove that for years. And um, what else did I have that was a stick? Well, my truck and that Mustang. And Brenda had a Camaro when we got married, but it was automatic. One of the first sticks I ever drove, Nico. I don't know if you're old enough, Chuck. You might have driven them, but three speed on the column used to be fairly common when I was growing up. A lot of pickup trucks had that, and a friend of mine liked to drive Falcons and Comets. He liked those early small Fords and Mercuries, and it seems like all he had was three on the tree column shifts. Plus, I had a van for a while. I bought a used van from the airport company that I worked for at the airport. I was getting rid of one they had there for freight and stuff, and I bought it, and it was a 3-speed on the column. Had a straight six in it, full size van, work van, straight six, and it got about 30 miles to the gallon. It was great. I loved that van. I should have kept it. I'm sure I got it sold it to get something else. I was driving it one day when I came up behind an MG midget or a MG, maybe it was a B, which is slightly bigger than a midget. And I was in it, and a buddy of mine was sitting in the right. Well, might have been Philip actually. Not sure. No, it wouldn't have been Philip. I didn't know Philip then. Somebody was sitting in the right seat with me. We were coming back from a trip where we'd been doing rendezvous kind of stuff. And I looked down, and this car stopped in front of me, and all of a sudden I realized he didn't have a gas cap on his car. He had a rag stuffed in the fuel tank. Bad cracker. And of course it sloshed, and then his car backfired, and it caught fire. And I like to never got him pulled out. I started honking on my horn and yelling at him out the window without getting too close. And I didn't think he was going to pull over. And he did finally. And he got out just as the thing was enveloped in fire. And he had just filled it up. And I remember this because I thought, wow, it's going to explode. I thought the gas tank, but it didn't. It was so full that what it did is as the car got hotter, and it was a total wreck. It burned to the ground. But as it got hotter, the fuel would burp. As it expanded, it would burp out of the gas filler and big globs out on the ground, and that would burn. And then one tire popped, and then another tire popped. But I was at a CB radio in my van, and I was trying to get a hold of the local emergency fire department, which didn't really work that well. Time they got there, it was a total loss. They wouldn't have been able to save it anyway. But taught me a lesson. Rag stuffed in gas tanks do not substitute for a gas cap. And he had laid his down. He'd gotten gas and laid it down apparently and driven off. And then the next time he filled up, he didn't have a cap. At least that's what he thought happened. But it taught me a lesson. That was kind of scary. Everything in his car burned. He tried to take a blanket he had in the trunk. Or maybe in the back seat because the trunk was pretty much fully involved. He tried to take a quilt and lay over it, to stuff it out, which wasn't going to work because it was getting air from underneath, and it had plenty of fuel since it was burning the gasoline out of his tank. And that I remember he put it on there and he was trying to tap it down. quilt just flamed up. I don't think it hurt him. I think they checked his hands, but he didn't get burned too bad, I don't think. But anyway, that was a long time ago. But I'll never forget that fire. That was a little bit too close for comfort. I started backing. I threw it in reverse immediately and made sure nobody's behind me, and I started backing up because I thought it was going to explode. Because that's what I'd always seen in the movies. You know, they always explode in the movies. And I found out it was probably safer because it wasn't full. I mean, because it was full. If it had, somebody told me, one of the firemen told me, or somebody told me that if it had been like a half a tank, it would have had more room to flare up inside the tank instead of coming out. And that might have caused an explosion. So I guess if you're going to have a gas tank fire, fill your car up. Nico, message deleted. Uh-oh. I don't know, Brenda, what'd you just delete? My wife is bad about that. So if she erased you, Nico, it was not on purpose. And I can't bring the comment back, apparently. I don't see it. I think that's what she deleted. Oh, wait a minute. There it is. Yeah, I don't know. She didn't mean to do that. I'm quite sure. Be careful with his thumb. She must be on her phone. Be careful out there, babe. You're deleting my listeners. So let's talk about some things. This is D-Day, and even though it's not the 75th anniversary of said day, it is still the anniversary of D-Day. And I had some things I wanted to show. And a lot of them you can see, you know, I'm not going to lie about it. You guys can see a lot of this stuff online yourself, but I'll save you some trouble and bring it out. But I was getting ready, but I want to start reading a book that I found. I'll show it to you in a moment. Now, I think I got this adjusted where I can read it and see it. And I used to know a couple of people that went in on D-Day, but I don't anymore, and they're getting to be fewer and fewer every day. And there's no doubt that I told you to take me out. Well, I'm sorry. Hang on a minute, and I'll make you not a moderator. If I can figure out how to do it. I might have to wait. You did tell me to, and I forgot. And plus, I thought you kind of calmed down a little bit. You know what? I'll have to figure out how to do that. I can't do it right now. I got it covered up, I think. Anyway, and while it's not the 75th anniversary, it is the 82nd anniversary, which is sort of coinkydinky because 82nd Airborne played a vital role. One of the major paratrooper groups that went in the night before, which a lot of what I'm going to show you is about the night before because it was such a dramatic. I can't imagine diving into that hellhole, and by that I mean the war being hell, and in the middle of the night in the dark, and landing in water, and villages, and they didn't know what they were going to land on. He put you back because you've been. Yeah, I did. There you go, Tina. That's exactly what must have happened. I put her back on because I thought she'd learned. She was being a good girl, and then now she's covering up Nico's comments. But it's okay. I read it anyway because it doesn't delete it over in my StreamYard chat. It just deletes it in the Facebook part. So we won't do that. So anyway, I'm just going to go over some facts, a few numbers, that aren't mine, so you know they're accurate, and just talk about some things. And then I found something that was totally just out of the blue. I'm not even sure. I guess must have been because I was looking up other things about the day, and it came up, so I'm saving that for last. But one of the things that got me thinking about it again was this book, and I can't see my screen, so I don't know what if you guys can see this or not. But oh, you can't see a title because it's on the spine. Doesn't have a cover. This book's called Private, and it was by Lester Atwell. I think I've talked about this before. When I was in high school, let me get this over here. Uh-oh. When I was in high school, one of the guys I ran around with had this book, and I thought, I'm still trying to figure it out. You can see it's pretty worn, but it's called Private. And I swear, I remember there being a section in here where he talked about jumping in on D-Day. And it stuck with me for years because it was such a well done first person account. I mean, it was so realistic. And then when the I think HBO miniseries came out, Band of Brothers, I believe it was the second episode, was when they jump out over over France for D-Day, and it was at night, and it was so much like what I remembered reading that it was just emotional, moving, even though I of course wasn't there. And I wanted to go over that and read some of that out of this book, and I can't find it. And I about decided I must have been reading two books, or maybe I read two books at the same time period, and I must have the wrong book. But I'm going to keep looking, and when I do, if I find it, and if it's in here, I'm going to bring it on and talk about it. But this book was about worn out, as you can see. So I got to looking for this book online. I wanted to get a copy of it. I wanted to try to buy a copy of it, and I wasn't finding anything. And maybe I Googled it one day and I looked, and I found it for sale by Mr. Atwell's son or grandson. They had printed up some copies of it. I think he had already passed. And they had printed some copies and were selling them for him or in his honor. And so I bought a couple of them. And it's really well done. I mean, I wasn't sure if I was just going to get something made printed at home or what, but it's really well done. It's well bound, and it's got a nice cover. And I mean, it's a good book, good paper. I sure would like to write a book like this someday. Anyway, I wanted to read that because he talked about how as the planes got over the coast and the Germans started figuring out what was going on, they started firing, of course, at all the I mean, there were thousands of airplanes in the air, not to mention fighters and bombers. I was reading just this morning that the U.S. airborne groups had like over 2,000 flying. Well, I think what they call back, they used the term trains, but they were basically the military version of a DC-3, a cargo plane. They jumped out of those and they dropped supplies out of them for the troops. And they had over 2,000 of them. And that's just the U.S. airborne. And I don't know what the Brits were flying. I think they were jumping out of Lancaster bombers and modified. But anyway, once the Germans started firing, I guess it's just second nature for the pilots to try to take evasive action. And when they went out of the plane, they never knew what altitude they were at. They were supposed to jump at 600 feet, which is just enough time for your parachute to open basically and hit the ground, because they didn't want to be in the air any longer than they had to be because you're a target. And they didn't want to jump any higher. They didn't want to jump any lower than that, though, because the chute might not open in time. And that's kind of what was happening. And in this story that I read, which I thought was that book, he talked about landing on literally on top of another paratrooper's parachute. And when it's inflated, the fear wasn't that that chute would collapse under him so much as it was he would kind of land on that chute, and that would cause his chute to have slack in it, which might cause his chute to fold up, which basically sends you plummeting the rest of the way to the ground because it might not refill. And it was a scary thing. And he said that happened. Uh, Again, the story I read said that happened a lot. And I believe that in the Band of Brothers, they showed that happening. So it was I just can't imagine. We call them the greatest generation, but I tell you, they were brave, very brave, is all I can say. Anyway, so I have some pictures, and we're going to go over a few numbers, and I'm going to get started, or I will never get started. So all the usual housekeeping stuff. Hit that like button, please, or the not dislike button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'd appreciate that. And leave a comment. Apparently that helps. I don't know what it helps, but I'm never going to be a big channel, but I wouldn't mind growing a little bit. And I need to find another quote, I guess, from Maurice's book. So what I decided I would do was talk about D-Day and just pull up. This was such a huge thing. The war, by the time D-Day happened, the war had been going on for 5 years or so, maybe just a little bit longer in Europe. And America had been involved by shipping supplies and everything else over there even before we were over there officially. So when it happened, newspapers all over the country, that was the story of the day. So I thought I would look for newspaper pages and articles and just put them up here. And the first two I've got here, the one on the left is from the Alabama Journal, and it says "Continent Invaded." And interesting, not in the 1944, but they've used graphics in the invaded part. It's not just black ink. I thought that was interesting that they were able to do that. It's not color, I don't think, originally, but it's still there. And that whole front page is covered with stories and talks about the Russians and referred to them as Reds. I just noticed that. It says 11,000 airplanes. 11,000 airplanes all flying together, more or less in formation for this. And that I'm going to assume that when they in that article where they're saying 11,000, they're counting fighters and bombers and the transports. Some of the airplanes dropped their loads. The jumpers got out, and if they survived, they flew back to England and picked up more stuff and went right back over. What did Nico say? My buddy, who was an Army Ranger, landed in power lines. Oh, that would suck. That could really be bad. You'd be surprised how often that happens, Nico. Yeah, I'd say so. I used to hang around with a bunch of skydivers, and that's a whole nother story. But we had one guy go down because his chute got tangled up. He didn't survive. And there was a young lady that was learning, and she landed in the river and was swept away by the river and didn't survive. But that's a whole nother story. But a lot of the people that I knew jumping back then were using the same parachutes these guys jumped with at D-Day. That was long before the fancy wings and stuff had come into use. So on January 6, 1944, nearly 160,000 Allied troops landed in Normandy. The operation involved about 7,000 ships of various kind and over 12,000 aircraft. I must be lying about something. My nose is itching. Isn't that what that means? By the end of D-Day, the Allied forces suffered at least about 10,300 casualties. That's um, killed, wounded, and missing. And that was actually far, far less than they thought it was going to be. That was about 10% of the men that went in on D-Day. They were expecting casualties to possibly be as much as, I think, 30 to 50%, something like that. He says my brother was a skydiver until he landed in a tree and had one of those fancy, and he had one of those fancy chutes. Um, yeah, my wife hung out at the airport with me for years when we were dating, so she knows a little bit about that too. And they think the German casualties were between 4,000 and 9,000. They really don't know for sure. Those records, while were probably there, it was such a chaotic day. Maybe they didn't keep them. Maybe the Germans didn't want them to know at that time, because that's, you don't want your enemy to know what your numbers are a lot of times. So maybe they never found out, but they think they were between 4 and 9,000. And I've got some pictures of captured, so they weren't all just wounded or killed. They were also, that counts, captured, and I'm sure missing in action. So then the second paper I have here is from the Arizona Republic. Nico, this is out your way. And it says, according to this, if you can read the fine print there, it says Arizona Independent Republic, the state's greatest newspaper. And it says Allied armies invade French Channel coast, and then it goes on to tell about the Allied Expeditionary Force under Eisenhower, and how there were the naval forces, air forces, and I mean it was a big combined effort. And here's some other key statistics broken down by category. The troops and fleet total troops landed were nearly 160,000. About 133,000 of those came in on the boats, the landing craft, the ships, and another 23,000 were the airborne operations, the ones that jumped in behind enemy lines basically the night before. And they jumped in the night before so they could distract the Germans away from the coast long enough. The thought was long enough for the amphibious landing to become secure and solid, and get a foothold in the continent, and then they could move together and then move further inland from there. But the whole idea of the airborne was to distract the enemy, disrupt their lines of supply, their communications, destroy bridges, that sort of thing, and try to keep them away from the coastline until the troops got landed. Nationalities that were involved primarily were United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. And then there were 12 other allied nations that had lesser numbers but were involved in some fashion, and it could have been anything from the boats they used to soldiers that were actually on landed. They think there was about 50,000 German troops defending the coast at that time, but I don't know if they were all in Normandy. Some of the Germans, up till the last minute, everything I've always read, and this was because the Allies were being very deceitful. They thought they were going to land at Pas-de-Calais because it was closer. They thought that's where they were going to invade. They thought it made more sense, and it probably did in many ways, because it was a much shorter route across the channel. It would have been quicker, but that's where the Germans were really waiting. So they didn't do that. They went to Normandy instead. So they got a little bit of a jump on them there. Bottom paper I put in for Mark's benefit, because it's an Ohio paper, Chillicothe Gazette, and its headline was Allies Drive into France, and there's a picture there of Montgomery, the British general. I can't think of his first name. And it just talks about the old bell. There was an old bell apparently known as the Old Rock in Chillicothe, and they started ringing it at the news of the invasion. this newspaper saying opposition to the landings was lighter than expected, and I think that's true based on the fewer casualties. I mean, don't get me wrong, 10,000 casualties is a lot of casualties, but they really thought there were going to be many, many more. The president's, asking for, how do we put that, thoughts and prayers, and um, there's just all kinds of things there about that on that front page. Over here, I've got one kind of close to me. It was the Asheville, North Carolina, the Asheville Citizen, and its headline was Allied invasion underway. Berlin claims troops. And I thought this was interesting. Some of the information these newspapers were using was coming from the Germans. This came out of Berlin. Berlin was claiming that troops reported landing in, I'll butcher French if I try to use it, Le Havre area. And it says Allies crossed Tiber in hot pursuit of fleeing Nazis. Victor Emmanuel transfers powers to Crown Prince. I'm not sure where that was. Paratroopers drop on Normandy Peninsula, Nazi news bureaus say. So we were getting information from the news. The press was getting information out of Germany somehow. I guess listening to radios. Down below it says Japanese lose 20 more ships in the Pacific area, and I'm not sure what battle was going on when D-Day happened. But we'd been fighting in the Pacific for 3 years by then. But most of the effort was, a lot of the effort was still going to Europe, and sometimes it's almost like it's two totally separate wars, but they were both going on at the same time. They didn't let U.S. Marines take part because the generals wanted a total Army beach invasion. I didn't know that, Nico. I'm sure that's probably true. They did a lot of jumping out here. Wide open. Yeah, they do, Nico. And a lot of balloon stuff out that way. Hot air balloon events. So, and anyway, these front pages are just full of odds and ends, all talking about the same thing, but different topics, which I thought was also interesting. The next one I've got here, I only had one, but I only put one in. I put this in for Carol because it's the Detroit Free Press. It just says invasion, and it says Supreme. Come on, back up. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, General Dwight D. Eisenhower's headquarters announced Tuesday that Allied troops began landing on the northern coast of France Tuesday morning, strongly supported by naval and air forces. So, I think I already mentioned there was about 7,000 naval vessels, civilian and otherwise. They got whatever they could get to move people across. And then included 4,000 landing craft and 195,000 naval personnel that were involved in this operation too, that may or may not have gone ashore. These were the sailors and the people running the boats and and whether it be private or civilian, people that were bringing cargo in, the ships that brought tanks and jeeps and trucks and moved in the mulberries, which I'll show you in a minute, which was they were going to build an artificial harbor so that they could unload all this stuff. They called them the mulberries, which didn't really work out that great, but they had to try something. Air support, again, I mentioned 12,000 Allied aircraft approximately, and they think there were only about 400 German Luftwaffe aircraft in the air for this, and that was one of the reasons it was successful. But the Luftwaffe had been taking a real beating in the air over France, over Germany. Airfields had been bombed crap out of them. So Germany's Luftwaffe, which had been all superior for the first 5 years of the war, was badly hurt by the time D-Day happened, and that was another reason it was successful. And then I've got the casualties there again. I've already talked about that, so I won't go over that again. Beat that horse to death. Basically, the beach breakdown, or the area that they were invading, was the coastline. It was about a 50-mile stretch. There were 5 primary landing sectors. Utah Beach, which is where about 23,000 U.S. troops landed, Omaha, which was another 34,000 U.S. troops, and the highest casualty count. Utah, Omaha was the hardest to get into and more defended at that point than the rest of them. Um, if you've ever seen the movie The Longest Day, they make a pretty big deal out of Omaha and how hard it was for them to get off because as they hit the beach, they ran into this bluff, and they had to figure out how to get through the up and over and through those defenses to get into the back behind the defenses so they could do the most damage. Gold Beach had 25,000 British troops. Juneau had about 21,000 or almost 22,000 Canadian troops, and Sword had another 29,000 British troops. The water battle of Normandy and the initial landings were the start of the larger operation, which was called Overlord. As the foothold expanded, massive reinforcements poured in. By June 11th, so 5 days after D-Day, there were 326,000 troops, and over 100,000 tons of equipment had been landed within 5 days. By June 30th, over 850,000, almost a million troops had been landed at the beachhead. 148,000 vehicles, which counted trucks, jeeps, tanks, all that kind of stuff, and 570 tons of supplies. So they were busy. Hey, Carol, just talked about the Detroit Free Press. I don't know if you heard that or not. So in this next group of headlines, I've got Great Falls, Montana, Evansville Courier, which I'm assuming is Evansville, Indiana, but I don't think I could read that one well enough to make sure that's Indiana, but I think it is. Germans, again, the Germans, getting our information from the Germans, say Allies land in France. So we kind of knew that was going on, but we heard it from the Germans. The invasion is on, according to the Great Falls Tribune. Crusade to free Europe begins in North France. The Leader Post, which I'm not sure where that paper was from. I don't think I've got that written down here. Oops, sorry. No, I don't think I have that one. Anyway, it says Canadians, and this was a Canadian paper, I believe. Canadians in the thick of it as Allies smash inland, and they were, what does this say, on Juneau. And actually, the Canadian troops, seems to me like Juneau, of the three, Gold, Juneau, and Sword, seems like Juneau might have been that more heavily defended beach of that group, and I think they took higher casualties than Gold or Sword. So they were definitely getting hit hard. And as you can see, there are quite a few pictures in that paper. The reproduction of it's not very good. So again, all kinds of different. Bernard Montgomery, that was the General Montgomery's first name, Bernard. I've seen the World War II movies. You'd think I would never forget that. Let's see if I had anything over here. I don't know if I've got it down here, and I've got pictures in a minute. We're going to talk about the boats that a lot of them landed in, and which is the iconic amphibious landing boat craft that you see in movies and all kinds of pictures. And those boats were built in New Orleans by a company named Higgins, and they were called Higgins boats. I got some pictures of that in a minute. But because of that, New Orleans has a remembering day for D-Day, and it's got a lot to do with the fact that they built all those boats there for this event. I haven't mentioned gliders, but besides parachuters, airborne troops also went in gliders. They did that usually because the gliders usually had more equipment in them, or maybe a jeep or a small field artillery piece, all kinds of things, not all of which survived the landings. Trying to land those things in the dark and in hedgerow country was not such an easy thing to do. I used to work with a guy who flew those gliders, and if I'm I remember correctly, he was a D-Day veteran. And he was he flew. He was a pilot for the company I worked for, but I think he might have been a part-time instructor and maybe flew some freight, did some of our freight hauls and stuff like that back then. I don't know if he flew. He might have flown passengers too, but his background had been he'd learned to fly gliders in World War II and as far as I know, was at D-Day. I never talked to him about it. So I got a bunch of series of pictures now, and I'm going to talk about them probably more than you want to hear, but I'll probably bore you all to death. But basically, these are the C-47s, sky trains. They referred to them. As a civilian, I always knew this airplane as a DC-3, and some of the guys I knew that actually these airplanes were still in service for various tasks up to and through the Vietnam War. And the guy I worked with in Nashville used to maintain DC-3 C-47 gunships in Vietnam, and he had lots of really crazy, wild stories to tell about DC-3s. They still use these. A lot of them that I've seen have been renovated. Some of them have new engines on them. They have turbines on them now, turboprop engines. The Forest Service has quite a few of them, or several of them anyway, they use for smoke jumpers. There are small airlines around the world that still fly these airplanes. This airplane was designed in the 20s originally, and it was just a hell of a workhorse and a really stout airplane. And it shows a lot of guys marching out to these planes, but each one of these planes loaded with guys with their gear and equipment could only hold about 17 men. So it took a lot of them to move this many paratroopers and men across there. And it's daylight in this photograph or getting dark. They didn't leave until after dark because they landed, at midnight and 20 minutes. I think the first group was supposed to land at 20 minutes after midnight at D-Day. And so they were in these airplanes a long time. Plus, these airplanes weren't real fast. And when you're trying to get a group of them up in the air and then get them all together at the same time, they flew patterns, usually circled around the airfield until maybe 500 of them were up in a group, and then they would leave. And they kind of were, Tina, because they were kind of built like tanks. They were, if you ever crawl around under the belly one, this guy that I worked with loved to tell stories about them, and he would tell us all the unique things he knew about DC-3s or C-47s, whatever, same airplane basically, and how thick the skins were, how many rivets, how many bolts. They really were different. Back then, they didn't do everything the most aerodynamic way, so they used round head rivets to put them together with. Nowadays, we use what we call flush rivets, so they're, the skins are smoother. They push through the air a lot easier. Hey, Tank Ferret, good afternoon, and all the magnificent people. Well, hello to you too. I believe you are new here. Welcome. So anyway, this is a picture. Let's see, Normandy invasion, American glider troops preparing to board aircraft, the U.S. 9th Air Force Base in England. A line of C-47 sky trains is visible in the background. More than 13,000 paratroopers of the British 6th Airborne Division and the 1st Canadian Parachute Division, Parachute Battalion, and the U.S. 82nd 101st Airborne Divisions dropped behind the invasion beaches in the pre-dawn hours of D-Day. They were reinforced by some 4,000 glider troops once the beach assaults had begun. And the gliders, I don't totally agree with that. The gliders went in at night too. They didn't. The beach assault started at 6 a.m., I believe, or a few minutes after 6. There were gliders on the ground before that happened. They were landing in the dark too. Okay, here is the tagline to this photo was called "A heavily burdened paratrooper armed with a Thompson M1 submachine gun," and that's right here on his, I don't know, I can't see the screen, so hopefully I'm circling. You know what? You guys can't see anything, can you? My goodness. Sorry, guys. What an idiot. I'm really sorry about that. I did not realize that you could not see that. I had it covered up. So let's back up a minute. I'll go let's do this real fast. No, you guys hadn't seen the newspaper clippings. You hadn't seen anything. Jeez. Sometimes you just feel like an idiot. Sometimes you feel like a nut. Sometimes you don't. There's the C-47s lined up in the background. Here's all the newspaper articles I was talking about that you guys weren't seeing because I didn't have them up here presented for you to see. And I apologize. So now let's take off here. So this guy's talking about him being heavily burdened. You can look, he's got this again, I'm not sure for what you're seeing, but right here is the Thompson submachine gun. That's what's strapped to his over his shoulder. His parachute is wrapped around that. This is his emergency chute here in the front. This is his main parachute here in the back. And I just went a page up. I didn't want to. Hang on, guys. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm not having a good day, am I? And you can see all the other gear. He's got a K-bar knife strapped to his leg. They usually had that in some place where they could grab it in case they had to cut away their parachute or part of it. And they're usually carrying all kinds of other stuff. He may be carrying extra ammunition for himself. He may be carrying ammunition for one of the guys that was carrying a bigger machine gun, like a Browning automatic rifle, or a heavier machine gun, or a bazooka for tanks. You know, they all split up the weight, and some of these guys had fold up bicycles that they were carrying because they used those once they got on the ground to move messages between groups and things like that. Um, these guys who were lean, mean fighting machines literally may have had an extra 100 pounds of gear on them. Usually they would drop that so that it hit the ground. It had a rope and it would hit the ground before they hit, so they weren't carrying all that weight. But anyway, he's trying to get himself up inside a DC-3, C-47, excuse me. I should have saved this one probably for last, but this is a airborne. This was assaulted by the Rangers, U.S. Army Rangers, and this was Point du Hoc. And this is an area. There's been a lot of movies done about this. They had to climb up the cliffs to get to the top where the gun emplacements were, and the enemy was pillboxes and whatnot. And they were supposed to have been some artillery mounted up there that would have been deadly on the beaches below if they'd been in action. Once they got up there, they found out that the artillery had never been mounted. The guns weren't there. And the enemy was there. They certainly had, they were fighting, but they weren't there. And that is a marker for an American soldier who has been killed. That's his helmet, but that's a captured German machine gun that's stuck in the ground. That's not his weapon. That's that's what they had to do. They marked their down brothers that way. Guys, I feel like such an idiot. Tina says, I was told they carried 75 pounds. Was that no, that's not an exaggeration, Tina. In fact, they carried more than that. Some of them did indeed carry an extra 75 pounds, but I was reading some of my notes I read last night. Some of these guys might have had 100 pounds, 120 pounds. It just depended on what they had to carry, what their particular mission was. Like I said, usually when they had that much weight, they would suspend that weight below them by strap so that it actually hit the ground first, and then they would hit the ground. I mean, it was suspended under the chute with them. So no, it is not an exaggeration. They did carry that much weight and more. This is a picture that I found that's in the World War II National World War II Museum, but it's a picture that was not, but was taken probably by a sailor or a soldier on D-Day and may not have been shown because they weren't supposed to be taking pictures. But so this was a gift of Mrs. Charles Giroux, and it was a private picture in her family collection that hadn't been seen. And this is on Omaha Beach. Again, Omaha was the hard beach. And if you look at that picture, you can kind of see why once they hit the beach, they had like a couple of 100 yards of open beach that they had to cross to get to the base of the cliff or the bluff. And then they had to get up the bluff. So if they got across this flat part, which was wide open, and they were easy targets, that was hard. And I've got another picture of this in a moment. But this is a medical detachment actually coming in from the 3rd Battalion, 116th Infantry Regiment, that lands at Dog Red, Omaha Beach, Dog Red being a position on the beach. This is a never before published image that captures some of the chaos of the early morning landings on June 6, 1944. This picture never was in the papers or any magazines or anything, because, like I said, it was in their family's private collection. Good morning, John. Welcome back, buddy. This is one of those landing boats I was talking about, and these things were largely made out of wood. So while they were kind of hiding behind the front gate before they landed, they really didn't have. I've read about other articles and stories about these where they talked about bullets ripping through, coming through them. So it was sort of an illusion of being a little bit safer, but they weren't all that safe. And if you look at them, you can see that they're crammed pretty full of people. So I think a lot of them might have been a little bit overloaded. They were trying to get everybody to the beach as fast as they could. You can see I've got a few pictures where they're even tighter than this. These guys went in carrying 70, 80 pounds too, Tina, and when they landed, because you can see they've got entrenching tools, which is a shovel. They've got their supplies. Each John may be able to talk about this or somebody else, but like each squad might have had a machine gunner, and the machine gunner had 3 or 4 guys that helped him carry his ammunition along with their own ammunition and their own sidearms, rifles, pistols. I'm not sure on D-Day. Every soldier that went ashore did not have a pistol. Most of them had a rifle. Some of them had both. Usually the pistols were by the sergeants and then officers. But this is an LCVP. So if you don't know what that is a landing craft vehicle personnel. Because the military can't put anything like, vehicle personnel landing craft. That wouldn't make too much sense. They always kind of spell it out backwards. But the personnel part's at the end. And if you look, you can see the coast there in the background of that picture. Some of these pictures, they're black and whites, and they're not always that great. So this is just what they brought home or published. Here's GIs heading on to Omaha, and you can kind of see what Omaha you had to land, and then they had to get up this rise. Once they got over to this part, again, I can't see what I'm showing you, but you can see how the ground goes from the beach up to here, and then it starts to change. And the enemy was up on this high ground, so they were shooting down. They definitely had the advantage. And if you look close, you can see a lot of guys that were on their, laying flat on the beach trying to get up. They'd have to get up, run, fall, get up, run, fall down, trying to get what little cover they could. And you can see how low in the water some of these boats are because they're so overloaded. Now, we got different kinds of boats in this photograph. This boat right here, or this vehicle right here, is called a duck. And in the military abbreviations, that's DAWK or DUWK, excuse me. Civilian wise, I've seen these things, and usually they're just called a duck, DUCK. And they're a motorized boat that had propellers on it, but it also had wheels. And once it hit the beach, they could turn the propellers off and engage the wheels and drive it up on the beach. I think they're four-wheel drive. And you see these today, and there are places where they use these as tourist vehicles. A few years ago, one of them sank and several people drowned. I can't remember if that was in Arkansas or Florida. But they've used them for taking swamp tours and taking people out in waterways and stuff where they wouldn't normally be able to go as tourist attractions. And so they're still out there. I can't remember who made them. Anyway, moving on. Here's a good example of what I was talking about, a boat being really overloaded. These guys don't hardly have enough room to turn around. And they're heading in. Of course, they probably didn't want to turn around. Maybe they did want to turn around. Some of these guys are the 101st Airborne Infantry. These guys didn't jump in. I'm not sure why. They weren't in that wave, but they are part of the 101st. And then the 4th Infantry Division. They're all aboard this LCT, which is a landing craft transport, I believe is what that stands for. And they're on the way into Utah Beach. I guess you have to give them credit. I mean, some of those guys look pretty worried, but a lot of them are still smiling. And of course, when you're really nervous and scared, that tends to be there tends to be nervous tension that comes out as that. Now, here's another really bad picture that came out of a personal collection, and this is on Juneau Beach. Well, wait a minute. No, it's not. This is by the same person. This is on Omaha, so this is probably taken by the same guy. And from that position, I'm guessing that he might have been a sailor, possibly on the rear deck of one of these other landing craft that had more men in it, like the ones I just showed you. Something along the lines of this. And if you look, there's a higher area back here in the back, and I suspect that picture and the one I showed you before is from an area like that, so he's up above the boat. But you can kind of see what they're trying to get into. And one of the problems was these boats ran aground while they were still out here in the water before they got all the way in. And when they dropped the front gate and everybody said they told them to unload, the men hit the water. They never knew how deep it was going to be. I read several accounts where men went under because it was over their head. And some of them were able to strip their gear off. Some of them drowned. Sometimes it was knee deep and they had to wade in, but I mean, they just didn't know for sure. And it was sort of a crapshoot at that point. Again, another landing craft. This is no smoking. I just realized that right up here in the front, on the front gate, it says no smoking. Like, who's going to tell these guys not to smoke? On their way in. Soldiers coming ashore. This is an LCVP. I told you what that meant already. You can see that they're trying to get up this beach area, and then they've got to get on this high ground as quickly as they can. And once they did that, then they were pretty much secure, and the Germans obviously weren't ever able to push them off, and they were able to maintain their beachhead. There's another picture of the landing craft going in. You can kind of get an idea. This is on Omaha, I think. Yeah. And you can see that bluff, the shoreline, all the soldiers already on their bellies crawling up the beach. And then this is what they're trying to get to, the high ground. And you can see all the boats, and you can see a lot of men in the water. If you look, they've already been discharged from their boats. And let me move this just a little bit. Now I can see comments. And, again, it's like jumping out of the airplanes. I mean, my God, that's like stepping into hell itself. It had to be. So this is kind of after, this is a day or two after D-Day itself, and this is part of the Armada. It says disgorges its cargo on Omaha. The LSTs are the bigger ships, the landing ship transports, I believe that stands for. Again, it's kind of backwards and mixed up. They beach themselves on purpose, and then they can offload all the heavier vehicles. And when they're empty, they're lighter. And the idea was, and when the big tide comes back in, they'll float now, and they can go off. And it talks about they're unloading the LVCPs and the DUKWs, which is what I was calling the duck a minute ago. Um, and I don't know if I can show you a duck on this picture. There's a lot of trucks here and a lot of all kinds of different vehicles, and I honestly do not see a duck right in that front picture. They're kind of funny looking. The wheels are sort of underneath them, and then they look like a flat bottom boat with wheels under it, and they are kind of strange looking. Something else you can see here, they're starting to put up barrage balloons. That's what these blimps are, blimp looking things. They're barrage balloons. I'll explain that in a minute if you don't know. Um, I always thought that barrage balloons were sort of a World War One thing more than World War II, but they actually used a lot of them on when they did an invasion like this, because it really prevented a lot of the low-level strafing and bombing runs as the men were trying to land on the beaches and make their, land amphibious landings. Now, something else that's pretty important when you've got wounded men is medical help. And this is an Army nurse in a field hospital. Nurses didn't go in with them, but they started landing on Normandy about 4 days after the invasion. The first ones that arrived were members of the 42nd and the 45th Field Hospitals, and the 91st and the 128th evac hospitals. And I'll talk about it a little bit more here. I've got some information, but the idea was to treat them as best they could here and get them back to England as quickly as possible. So they were bandaging them up and trying to get them on board a boat, which would then take them back over across the channel, 20 miles or whatever it was in that location, and get them back to a hospital. While they did, now male medics and corpsmen landed with the soldiers as they went in, but the nurses didn't get there till a couple days later. They, like I said, they began arriving just like 3 or 4 days after the actual invasion. And let's see here, I've got some more information on them. They had what they were trying to, they knew it was critical to save more men. It was critical that they get treated as quickly as possible and into a hospital as quickly as possible. So these nurses and these evac hospitals are all part of what they call the evacuation chain. So while male medics and doctors landed on the beaches on D-Day, the others, the nurses, and they began coming in later, and the medical network stretched from the combat zone back to Great Britain, which is where the hospitals were set up. And these brave women, nurses, men and women, were there to stabilize the casualties as quickly as possible and get them on a boat and move them. So this chain included the field and evacuation hospitals, which is where somebody like this lady would be working, this nurse. The first nurses, which were units of the 42nd, 45th, and the 91st and the 128th, they landed on the beachheads 4 days later. The facilities were set up. They were tents. They were just miles from the front line. Literally, bullets and bombs were going off not far from where these hospitals were set up. If you've ever watched the movie MASH, sometimes they're getting really close to the action. Sometimes hospitals got overrun. That's real stuff. That kind of crap really happened. The nurses were supposed to work like 12-hour shifts on and off, but usually they worked 16 hours and more. They basically just worked around the clock till they dropped. These women, military Army nurses in combat, don't get enough credit ever. They're getting more and more credit now, and I'm really glad for that. They were always surrounded by the sounds of artillery being shot and being shot at. Um, it was had to be a hard working environment. Their function was to provide medical treatments like plasma, set splints and broken bones, and then emergency surgeries if they had to. Um, then the coastal facilities and transit hospitals in southern England were the next chain. And because of the proximity and the severity of the combat, of course, the initial wave of D-Day casualties was transported by adapted landing craft and hospital carriers back to England within. They wanted to get them back at least within 36 hours, and quicker than that if they could. Um, at this point, we didn't have air transports to take them back. Helicopters weren't a thing. So there weren't any airfields captured yet to fly them back to England, which would have obviously been quicker. And again, if you've watched MASH, you know that helicopters, by Korea, helicopter transporting wounded soldiers from the front back to hospitals was a real thing. In Vietnam, that was a huge thing. But that hadn't started yet. Helicopters still weren't really that. There just weren't many of them around in World War II. Hey, Don, welcome in. I just saw you. And Michelle's moments, welcome, Michelle. Michelle said 2 of my aunts were World War II nurses. Oh, cool. I wish they'd asked them more about it. Yeah, don't we all? I mean, I feel that way about. I had uncles in World War II, and I didn't talk about to them near much. They told some wild stories about it a few times, but not stuff you can always count on. Third World War II daughter there as well. Oh wow, that's quite the deal. That's something to be proud of. Let's see what else I got. There were holding hospitals, which were near the railroads and the ports when they first got there, and then they would move them on in to other places. Aerial, they talk about aerial evac, but that didn't start till later when they could get to airports. That was C-47s again, the same airplanes that they were jumping out of and hauling freight in. They were taking wounded soldiers back to England once they were able to acquire airports, secure airports, and land. Because when they were dropping paratroopers out, they didn't have to land. In fact, they didn't want to land. But they flew back and forth almost continuously once they got that situated. And they had hospitals in Scotland, Iceland, and even all the way across in Canada. I'm not sure how that worked, but because that couldn't have been a quick transfer there. Eventually, that seamless integration of these frontline hospitals, transports, and overseas facilities, and they had ships, medical ships, a couple of which are still around. That kept the mortality rate under 4%, which was a huge thing. If you go back even as far as World War One, mortality rates were much higher. It was because of the lack of medical care. As medical care became more advanced and more at the front lines or near the front lines, more men were saved, more lives were saved. You go back to as far back as the Civil War in the United States, the casualty rates once they got to a hospital usually was worse than when they were out in the field because they didn't know enough about it, and it was still they were still learning. So if you want to know more about the hospitals and the nurses, um, I have got some information here, I believe. The National Park Service has a military nurses page you can look up, and then the person that put this in had some information about uh, other parts of the battle. I think that's part of the museum I was talking about earlier. So anyway, that's the nurses, and this is just another picture of a landing craft once it's been emptied. I don't know who the guy standing there that's not left is probably the operator of the boat, would be my guess. I see a roll of wire left that somebody didn't take. Again, I think that's Omaha because you can see how flat the beach is, and then it goes up. a few hundred yards away from the water, and I'm pretty sure that's still Omaha. Yeah, it is. It's this. The caption for this picture when it was first published reads as follows: "Into the jaws of death, down the ramp of a Coast Guard." These are Coast Guard operated boats too, by the way, not just Navy. Landing barge, Yankee soldiers. This must have been written by Canadians or Brits. Yankee soldiers stormed towards the beach, sweeping fire of Nazi defenders in the D-Day invasion of the French coast. Troops ahead may be seen lying flat under the deadly machine gun resistance of the Germans. Soon the Nazis were driven back under the overwhelming invasion forces in from the Coast Guard and Navy amphibious craft. I forgot to mention the Coast Guard. U.S. Coast Guard was very active in this kind of amphibious action, especially for D-Day. This is one of those larger LSTs. These are some of the boats that sometimes ran in literally aground, and then they would unload and then refloat and move back out. And this is also where they were building the mulberries, or these artificial not artificial reefs, excuse me, artificial piers and areas to unload equipment, docks and piers where they can move in. Let's see here. It says, I can read this, or you guys can. I've got it all. I didn't take any separate notes. The solution was an artificial harbor, which they built in England and then literally towed it over there on the morning of D-Day. They brought them to Normandy. They were known by the code name Mulberry. Two of these harbors were designed to unload men and supplies. Thousands of soldiers and sailors were involved in this effort. Spud barges that were floated up and down with the tide. They literally drove poles into the substrate, under the water, into the beaches. And as the water tides went in and out, these barges or these docks would float up and down on those poles. We still do that today. That method, and the center of the harbor's unloading activity. They were joined to the shore by floating roadways known as whales, WHALES. I'd never heard of that one. In addition to the floating roadways, special barges were constructed that could unload LSTs while afloat. That's the LSTs I was talking about that sometimes literally ran aground and then unloaded. They built some of these so that the LSTs could unload and not run aground. So that's what's going on here. Now, the problem with this was the mulberries didn't really last as long as they had hoped. Everything I've read said that because of storms and things along the coast, apparently that channel can be pretty unpredictable at times. And, they didn't hold together is what it amounts to. What kind of, let me see what I'm missing here. I don't think the nurses ever got enough credit. And Don's talking about the World War II Museum in New Orleans. That's the one I mentioned very briefly early on. And I thought I had some notes about the landing vehicles, the Higgins boats I was talking about a few minutes ago. And that's a Higgins boat right there. This kind of a landing craft where the front drops down and they can pull in. Those were designed and built by a gentleman in New Orleans, and they were built there in a company in New Orleans. So remember I talked about the barrage balloons. So I had a couple of things about this. One, these are African American soldiers of the 320th Anti-Aircraft Barrage Balloon Battalion, the 1st U.S. Army Division. They're preparing to deploy a barrage balloon on Utah Beach during the Normandy invasion. The U.S. military was not integrated in 1944. Black soldiers and white soldiers existed, but separately. And these guys were doing the kind of work that they allowed the African American or black soldiers to do, barge things, unloading freight. Early on, they weren't allowed in combat much. So this is the kind of stuff they did. Now, these barrage balloons are important. I don't want to sound like they're not, but a lot of them wanted to see, be in the fight, and they weren't allowed. But this was a pretty big deal, and I didn't know. Always knew these were obstacles for airplanes to keep them from flying, low and through. But I didn't know how sneaky they were about it. These balloons had a surprise. It says here that barrage balloons could be moored to the ground or to a ship or a heavy mooring cable, and the combination of the heavy cable and the ball and the balloon itself was simple yet effective means to preventing any enemy aircraft from conducting strafing and dive bombing runs over the beach. And these, as far as I know, all these were helium filled. Now, I found this information about barrage balloons, and this drawing was actually how they were armed and how some of them worked. And the cable that ran from the ground that held them down, or the ship, had this cable that would break away, and it would snag onto an airplane going by, and on that cable was a bomb. So as the airplane flew through that cable, if it did, and it caught that cable, the parachute, I'm assuming this is trying to show that the lower parachute was bigger, the upper one was small. It would actually drag that bomb down against the enemy aircraft and explode. I never knew that until I read this yesterday. So it had links at the top and the bottom that would break away. Of course, the balloon would then float off. But at that point, that was probably way less important than stopping the aircraft. And this this photo beside that is from June 9th. So 3 days after the actual invasion, and this is what the beachhead looks like. All the construction going on. They're grading roads, putting in areas to move freight in and out. They've got some Jeeps here on board. You can see quite a few. If you look out over the water, I see a couple of dozen or maybe several dozen barrage balloons out there all in the air. So they were pretty important, at least on the beach. Now, you didn't use them once they moved inland, but which in some places is probably kind of a shame. They probably wish they had them. I had never seen this drawing with the bombs, and they did this. I believe if I read this, if you notice that airplane in that drawing is actually marked with German Luftwaffe markings. So this drawing was created just for D-Day, and I think this was something they came up with just at this time. I'm not sure if these had ever been used this way before. And I thought that was pretty interesting. uh, it says when the plane strikes the cable, a bomb is released via a parachute system, and a well-placed hit could explode a wing or a gas tank. The steel cable alone was enough to cause the airplane to stall and crash. I mean, it hit the propeller, an airplane's coming down. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons you wouldn't want to fly through this tangle of cables and balloons if you're an airplane, if you're a pilot. I don't think there's anything else in there that I hadn't already said. Here's something. The 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion served 140 days in France. I guess most of that was over the beaches. And here's just another picture of Mulberry and their unloading dock. There's some ducks. Those two vehicles sitting in the middle of that. I can't see right here. And you can't see that. What? How can I not? Why is that not showing? Oh, there it is. There, those two right there, those are ducks. So you see they're kind of odd shape. Actually, I think they're made to go frontwards or backwards. The wheels are underneath it, which makes them look kind of odd. They really weren't built as, something you go speeding down country roads with. And if you saw them in real life, there's two big propeller mechanisms that when they're in the water would fold down or unfold to propel the boat in the water, and then when you're back on land you could crank them back up so they're up out of the way. And they would disconnect from the transmission and the wheels would work. So you could drive it wherever you wanted to. And let me see what I've covered up here. I did have some notes here. Let's see what I said. That's the USS LST-21 loading ducks and armored fighting vehicles onto a Rhino barge in the English Channel. I'm not sure what Rhino, I think it was a code name. During the Normandy invasion, the invasion's naval and amphibious operations were codenamed Operation Neptune, and the U.S. Coast Guard played a key role in that mission. Nearly 100 Coast Guard manned cutters, warships, and landing craft participated in D-Day, and 4 landing craft infantry LCIs were sunk on the approach to Omaha Beach. Now, I got a warning here for the next slide. It does have a fallen aviator that's picture, and again, I didn't have to put this in there, but I wanted to show the danger of being a glider pilot. And like I said, I used to work with the guy who flew gliders over there at D-Day, and I didn't know much about this when I knew him. I was still a punk kid, I was in my 20s, early 20s, and he wasn't. He was kind of a strange guy. Maybe I know why now. But I wish I'd gotten to know him a little bit better and thank him for his service. Back then, that wasn't a common thing. But the glider part of this operation was known as Mission Chicago. And the gliders had troops in them, but they carried equipment, like I said, motorcycles, jeeps. They had some, I know in some of these invasion airborne operations, they would have jeeps with extra machine guns on them, or they'd have small field pieces, field artillery, small caissons, not caissons. What's the word? Gosh, I can't. It'll hit me in a minute. Anyway, small artillery that could be transported behind the jeep and used. That's what these gliders had. These things were pretty good size, but they were not. A glider, you got one shot at landing, and if you didn't land in the places these guys were landing in the dark, and you can see what happened to this one. He ran into what looks to me like a hedgerow, and he probably never saw it coming. And anyway, so I put that up. I guess you could say in their honor, but I only ever knew one glider pilot from this era, and unfortunately, I didn't talk to him enough to know about him. This particular pilot is Lieutenant John Butler, co-pilot of what was called the CG-4. This was one of the Waco built fighting Falcon, which they weren't much of a Falcon. I mean, they were unclip them, they come down, that's it. He was part of Mission Chicago, which was the insertion of troops and heavy equipment by glider. I don't know who came up with this idea. The Brits used this a lot. I always thought it was their thing. Most of the gliders were built here. There were some British gliders there, but most of them were this Waco brand. They were Americans. Also in this particular crash was a Brigadier General, Don Pratt. He was the deputy commander of the 101st Airborne Division. He was killed in this. He was going in on D-Day. He had wished to accompany his unit into combat, but he was not jump certified, so he rode in with the glider and didn't survive. So he brought the glider down into a designated landing area west of St. Marie du Mont, about 5 miles inland from Utah Beach, but the aircraft skidded out of control on the dewy grass and hit a poplar tree. Butler was killed by a branch that pierced the canopy, and Pratt, who had been sitting in his command, he was in a Jeep. He was riding in a Jeep inside the glider, and he unfortunately broke his neck. He was the highest ranking Allied officer killed on D-Day. I did not know that either. I didn't realize I hadn't read about this before. But the glider was dramatized in the film Saving Private Ryan, with Pratt's identity changed to fictional Brigadier General Amend. I didn't realize that either. I didn't know that they had done that. That's, I guess, good to know. But it was a rough way to go in. I always thought I'd rather been jumping than flying one of these things. I just felt like you were at the pilot's mercy. Not that he wasn't good and trying to land the aircraft. It was such an unwielding aircraft to try and land in these primitive conditions at night. I just always thought that. Like I said, I think I'd rather been on a parachute. And this is just a scene a few days after as the invasion went on. This is the Canadian troops on Juneau and bringing in some German prisoners. This is the group that I mentioned earlier, I believe, that the casualties were so high. Um, they had nearly 50% casualties, this Canadian outfit on Juneau. So Juneau was another heavily guarded beach area, and they got hit hard. This was also one of the places, although they did secure their beachhead, you know, they mentioned in here that this was partly due to the success of the first Hussars, who were mounted armored regiment. Early on, Hussars were like heavy cavalry units in other armies in history. So these guys were in an armored regiment, but there was something else they tried to use at D-Day that did not work very well, and that was what they call the dual drive or DD tanks. And the dual drive tanks also had propeller mechanisms that would fold down in the water, supposedly, and propel them while they were floating. And they had these skirts. That's what they were called, skirts that went around the outside of the tank, which was supposedly going to help them be buoyant. We're talking about a tank here that weighs a whole lot, tons of weight, steel. Some of them did make it, they did work, but when the water gets rough, those skirts would move and they would lose the air that was underneath them, and they sank. And there's pictures, if you go to these websites, there's a lot of pictures of them sitting on the bottom of the ocean. Some of them are still underwater, and some of them are. Something just ran into my building and startled me. A bird hit the glass, I bet. Anyway, they sank. A lot of them didn't make it in, and some of the crews got out, some of them didn't. So they had some of those, but a lot of them didn't make it to the beach, so they had to fight extra hard. But the ones that did, did what they were there for, and helped these guys make a lot of headway on the beaches. Now I got something. Now the next part of this is not directly D-Day, but it happened during the same time period. It actually started before D-Day, and part of the story will end after D-Day, but it was important to D-Day. I'd never seen this airplane before, so here it is. This was a B-17 that was named. You guys know about nose art and the airplanes being named. The Tennessee Hillbilly. So how much more appropriate can you get than that? This airplane was shot down, and this post was actually on Facebook, and it was posted by, I believe, the son of the man who flew this airplane. So this airplane was actually shot down on March 22nd, 1944. And all this is documented to be true. Yes, tanks buoyant. Isn't that kind of an odd thing, Tina? I always thought that was sort of oxymoron, and it didn't work very well. So there you go. Which this airplane was shot down over France or Germany, over France, March 26, 1944. His father, Michael Faley, was the pilot, retired Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mars, U.S. Air Force, from Fincastle, Tennessee. Now, that's cool to me because I used to go through Fincastle almost every day when I worked at the lake. Fincastle is an area around Norris Reservoir, TVA, the TVA reservoir that I worked on. Fincastle was just a small, wide spot in the road. It was probably a grocery store and a post office at one time, that kind of stuff. But I used to go through Fincastle all the time. So I thought, I got to put this in here. Which is, it says in the mountains of East Tennessee, he's in the kind of in the Cumberland part of the Appalachians. The crew was able to bail out, so most of these guys survived. I think there is one who did not. These airplanes usually carried a crew of 10, so every time one went down, when these 800 airplane bombing missions happened, and if 200 airplanes went down, that's 2,000 men either killed or captured every time they went down, because they had 10 men on them. I've got the military report on this, and I'll read it in a minute, and it shows how these guys got out. The crew was able to bail out, but then the plane exploded with the pilot, this man's father, still on board at the controls. He was still trying to fly it till his men got out. But the airplane exploded, didn't kill him, and he was able to open his own parachute. And even though it was on fire, and then he went down and was captured, and he was a POW. Now, he suffered severe burns and some damage from this. I'll tell you about that in a moment. But he did survive. This airplane is a Boeing B-17. I got the serial numbers when it was built. And when it was built, not sure if this one came out of Washington, Seattle area, where Boeing was located, but they delivered it to Cheyenne, where there was an Air Force base, probably the very Air Force base that our friend John Surfbum was stationed at, I'm thinking. And that's where it was delivered. That's where the training crew was on board, and that's where the men were trained to fly this airplane and then take it to Europe. And it was the Tennessee Hillbilly. It was in the 303rd Bomb Group, 427th Bomb Squadron. There's a bunch of other stuff there that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it was shot down by anti-aircraft or flak, what they call AA fire, on March 26th. Now, here is a written report from one of the survivors. Or actually, this guy, no, let me back up. He was a survivor, but he was on the plane, one of the other planes. He said, I was a tail gunner on aircraft 4239875. So he was on board this number one. If you can see this, I'm getting rid of this note here. I can't do that. Right here, he was on board this airplane. This is how when they drew up formations, this is how they did it. This is an actual military record from 1943 or 5. This is the airplane, the Tennessee Hillbilly. This is where they were flying, in this position. When this airplane was hit, 2 engines went out first, and then a third one caught fire. And it said that the missing aircraft was flying in number 3 position, as indicated. And I'm going to have to open this up because I got to read this. Where'd he go? What did I just do? Why can't I not read that? Oh, it's on my next slide, maybe. Okay. So that airplane, and it'll tell in more detail, but basically it went into a long dive, went underneath number 4, and then disappeared. And these other people, gunners in these other airplanes, saw it going down. So they had a record of it, and they started counting. This was common practice. They would count the parachutes they saw, and then when they got back, if they survived the mission, they got back to Britain, they would tell what they saw. So they'd have an idea if these guys were on the ground, if they survived the explosion, if they were, be counted as killed in action or whatever. So basically, here's what he said. This was in his report. Said aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft fire just a few seconds before they hit. They said bombs away. Now, I've read a second report that said the airplane that was hit did drop its bombs. And the guy in the airplane he was in, they didn't get theirs dropped. But this guy, when he was hit, probably did that just as a reaction to get rid of the weight of the bombs. It then peeled off to the right, passed under number 4, and went into a shallow glide. About 30 seconds later, the first 4 parachutes came out and opened as soon as they had cleared the slipstream. About 30 seconds after that, 2 more came out. That's 6. One dropped from about 19,000 to 15,000 before it opened, and the other dropped to about 17,000. You got to remember, it's pretty darn cold up there, especially when this came down. I mean, you're talking way below zero. The ball turret gunner, which is in the belly of the airplane, he got out. Said that he reported that one more parachute got out, so that'd be 7 that they knew for sure. And the man in that parachute apparently made a long delay because the parachute didn't open until he was way after he'd left the aircraft. The aircraft then nosed down in a half spin with the left wing on fire. Then the left wing fell off. The aircraft made a 3/4 turn, after which it exploded in the air. Just at that time, the parachute came out and opened. That was the guy's father, the pilot. And although the parts of the aircraft were all around it, the parachute didn't seem to be hit by anything. It opened up and he went down safe in that regard. It says here altogether, 8 parachutes were seen to come out of the aircraft before it blew up. The incident took place in the vicinity of, I don't know, someplace I can't say. I'm sure it's not how it's pronounced, France, which is a few miles southwest of St. Omer. That was written by Second Lieutenant Dallas Kendall. Like I said, that is a military report of what happened on this flight. Then I had other reports written down too. They talk about what the damage was, about the jumps, and it listed all the people that were on board that bird. And whether they got out. If you'll notice that if you read down through here, you've got all the pilots and co-pilots. Actually, that other thing was wrong. Mars was the captain. I said somebody else a minute ago. If you look, POW, 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 EVD, Conrad Kurse evaded the enemy, and he survived and went on. Not survived. All these guys survived. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's 9. There's another report that says one of the gunners they thought was killed on the airplane before it even went down. So I'm not sure about that one. But Kurse evaded capture, and I've got a story about that. It says this was his story. He told this after he was able to get back to after D-Day. Again, I said it was tied to D-Day. After D-Day, and as U.S. troops move into France, he was able to get back into the U.S. Army behind our lines, and he went back to fly. He flew a whole bunch of missions in the Pacific, which you don't hear much about that, but they did a lot of bombing over there too with long distance bombers. Hang on a minute. Okay, now this next thing was written by Chris Kurse, and I'm not sure why I thought this was a daughter, but this might have been a son. I'm not sure. The Chris is spelled with a K, K-R-I-S, so I'm not sure if it's Christopherson or what it's short for. Anyway, they wrote this, and it said, my father was a new member. He'd replaced the bombardier when the Tennessee Hillbilly was shot down. His name was Tech Sergeant Conrad John Kurse, and he gave his story and is posted at the American Air Museum in Britain website, which you can find. Said, I gave them 10 more photos. My father wrote 2 books, one named De Groot, G-R-D-E-G-R-O-O-T-E, and another called The Java Diary, completed in 1987. But he was told at that time that he needed to get a ghostwriter to help clean it up, to remove repetition, to smooth it out, and have the action at the beginning to move along a little faster, blah, blah, blah. And due to the cost of getting a ghostwriter, he never got it published before he passed away, unfortunately. Chris says that they did genealogy, getting the cursed family history back to 1708, then spent time getting actual documents to clear up his or her father's childhood, even went to court in East Moline, Clark County, Illinois, to get my grandfather's asylum records for having Mad Hatter disease caused by breathing mercury fumes, which led to alcoholism. If anybody knows about making hats and the whole idea in Alice's Wonderland, the Mad Hatter was mad because of the mercury fumes they worked with to make hats out of felt, or to make felt for hats. Her grandfather had passed away in the asylum in 1932. I got my, I keep saying she, and I don't know why. Maybe I saw a picture, but for some reason I keep thinking it's a she. Got my father's second book, De Groot, or De Groot. That was the story for him to print to the publisher, Red Engine Press. Put it on Amazon.com. Just finished his first book printed by the publisher, but after the expense of De Groot, just had Java Diary printed for friends and family. Now, they got this book printed, and you know who likes books? Somebody's looking for it. I'm going to find a copy of it. And it was sold on Amazon at one time. Let's see, he got his first book printed, but they didn't do so. I'd love to see that second one. The back of both books has my father's bio and brief history on his three sons. I think he has memorabilia that he donated to 3 museums: the American Air Museum in Britain, 8th Air Force Museum in Florida, and I think one in Albuquerque. This is their writing, Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the B-17 crews trained for the 19th Bomber Group before being stationed in the Pacific. So he fought in the Pacific. I'm guessing he fought in the Pacific, or flew in the Pacific, before he went to Germany or France and was shot down, because he was shot down in 44, which means there was 2 years or more that he could have been fighting in the Pacific before that. Only 28 men out of that group survived World War II, he being one of them. It would be nice to find out what he donated to those museums, so they're asking if anybody knew, because they would like to at least see him or have pictures of it. And he said I can answer copyright office questions for the Java Diary book. I'm gonna look for that. I'm probably never find that one, but I think I can get the other one, and here's why. I have to, save up my nickels and dimes, pick up some pop bottles. This is the book, and it was written. This is a hardback copy of the book as it was written. These are both pictures of Mr. Kirsch. Obviously, a younger picture when he was flying, and in an Air Force flight jacket and goggles and a helmet, leather helmet. Don't know if that means he was a pilot or if he was a gunner, but he flew these missions. And that is a picture of him, obviously as an older man on the right. And I just think this would be really cool to find. This is something I've never heard of. Don't know anything about this guy, but the fact that I've read the report, and I think I've got it here in a minute. Once he evaded capture in France, the local underground resistance helped hide him out. The very next day, they were going to put him on a train, obviously disguised, not in his uniform, on board a train to go to try. They were trying to get him to Spain. At that time, that was an escape route for downed aviators and other escaped prisoners, was to go into Spain, and then from Spain you could get back to England. But they couldn't do that. And but they took him to the train station and got him a ticket. They were going to put him on this train. And when he did, 4 or 5 other men from his crew were already there as captives. And he didn't want them to see him and, accidentally give him away. So he hid, didn't get on that train, went back to the resistance house, stayed there for 3 months, and basically fought the Germans with the underground. He did a bunch of sabotage operations. The Gestapo was after him. But eventually, as the Allies moved in after D-Day, he was able to get back behind the Allied lines and was rescued. I just thought this was cool. This is in one of the museums around the country, the National Museum of the U.S. Army in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And they have put in about 80 B-17s models over in the ceiling area to represent this kind of a flight. And that was a lot of effort. But I mean, that's just 80. Some of these flights had 800 in them. The U.S. Army Air Force 8th Bomber Command, famously known as the Mighty 8th, there's a lot of information out there about the 8th Air Force, was the primary strategic bombing force deployed in England during World War II. Activated in February 1942, it later became the 8th Air Force, just straight 8th Air Force. After they separated it from the Army, it was the Army Air Force, and then it just became the Air Force. They were famous for heavily striking Nazi-occupied Europe and crippling the German war machine. A lot of up until this time, the British had been bombing Germany and occupied France and the other areas at night because it was safer for their pilots. And when the U.S. got involved, they were trying to make more, but they weren't always able to hit the right targets at night. So they decided they wanted to try to do it during the day, and they thought they could do it with the flying fortresses because they were so heavily armed with machine guns in the nose and the tail and the belly and on top and on the sides. They thought surely, they could fight the German fighters, and they did to some degree, but they still lost a lot of men and a lot of bombers went down. So it was tough. Let's see, the 8th Air Force extensive history and dates back to World War II. By mid-44, the 8th Air Force had reached a total strength of more than 200,000 people, and at its peak strength, the 8th Air Force could put up 2,000 4-engine heavy bombers at once, along with another 1,000 fighters to protect those bombers in one mission. 2,000 of those airplanes up at one time flying up. I cannot imagine that. For these reasons, the 8th Air Force became known as the Mighty 8th. And that's a quote from somebody who was involved with them early on. You can read that there. And I had more information about that aircraft that went down. I guess I decided not to include that. And this last photo I put at the end, this is just a memorial picture that was put. This memorial was built after the war. Obviously, it's like, the Allies from Western countries, France, Britain, the U.S., and the Russians, and whoever else is over here. On VE Day, this was, of course, obviously celebrated. The war began 5 years before the Allied forces invaded Normandy. But when this happened, when VE Day happened, they were still fighting in the Pacific, so the war was not really over. I'm sure it felt that way for a lot of people, but it really wasn't finished. So now, where am I? Let me close this stuff out, guys. I apologize for all the mistakes. That was I goofed that up a couple of places, but yeah, I saw those 10. That guy had a whole row of ribbons on his uniform, and he probably deserved every one of them, I'm sure. I mean, just the work he did once he was in France underground. It's like something you'd see in a movie. Michelle, thanks, Michelle. Thanks for coming by. It's right at noon. How about that? So I forgot a couple of things, and I left some stuff out. There's a lot of quotes online from guys who jumped and went in at D-Day in the airborne divisions. I guess I've been fascinated by them most of my life because I worked on airplanes and I was interested in all that kind of stuff when I was a kid, and I actually wanted to be a skydiver or learn to skydive. And at one time when I was didn't know what it took and was not married, and all, I thought I'd like to be a smoke jumper at one time, but I was a long way from being a smoke jumper. The But so I was interested in all that, and so there you have it. I don't know if you have any questions that I can answer, but there's a lot of information online if you are interested. And like I said, if you search on Google for firsthand accounts of paratroopers on D-Day, you can find a lot of the information of some of the stuff I was talking about earlier about how crowded the sky got and how the chaos of the airplanes trying to dodge, ground fire and at the same time drop jumpers and the story that I read that I thought was in this book talked about the fact that sometimes the pilots would hit the go button even if they weren't in the right place because they were either going down or the fire was so heavy they didn't think they were going to survive it. And so sometimes the paratroopers didn't land where they were supposed to because they had to get out. They had to get out sooner. Of course, plane loads of them did go down when they were shot by anti-aircraft fire. So it was a rough time, but that was D-Day 82 years ago. And I have to say, I think they might be the greatest generation, at least that we've had, that we're ever going to write about or know about. Give me a minute to get my voice back. Anyway, so I don't know if anybody here goes to the movies. Hey, Rhonda. A lot of reasons why they were captured was because they couldn't get out of their chute. Yeah, they couldn't. Well, I mean, you're coming down in a big old green or white chute, and you see in pictures a lot of times they look white. And I guess a lot of them were white because they were made quickly. But I've seen a lot of military air chutes at that time that were a green OD color. Would have been a little bit harder to see, but it's not exactly, you can't really hide very well when you're coming down under a big white target and they can, watch you come down. And then if you get tangled up in the bushes or a tree, you're pretty much they're going to catch you. And when these bombing runs were being made, I mean, the anti-aircraft fire and groups on the ground where these planes were going over during this anti-aircraft fire were always there waiting, looking, for prisoners. So, yeah, they didn't really have time to dime, and I'm sure they didn't want to spend the money or take the time. I mean, they just couldn't. And so there you go. And I was going to ask another question. Yesterday, I was looking for a quick snack, so I went by Burger King. I'm changing the subject because I'm curious if anybody has gone to see a movie lately. And I don't know if anybody in here even watches movies, but has anybody gone to see the Grogu movie, The Mandalorian and Grogu? I'm curious because Burger King is giving away these little boxes with fries in them, or in this case, chicken strips. And I've not heard a lot of good reviews about the movie, and I just wondered if anybody else in here had seen it because I haven't. I don't know that we'll go see it. In fact, I don't even know if there is a theater here. I think they reopened it, but I don't know if they have it. Uh, I'll probably watch it when it comes out on the TV because I really enjoyed the Mandalorian TV series on Disney Plus. Brendan and I watched that, but like I said, I haven't heard a lot of good reports about the movie. But I have to wonder: is the movie just not good, or is it because it doesn't follow the canon? A lot of people don't like some of the stuff that Disney's done with like Galaxy's Edge and stuff because it doesn't follow the canon and it doesn't seem to fit in with the movies that have been made and that part of the story. So I just wonder if people don't like this for that reason or if it's really just a sucky movie, which I find hard to believe that it's that bad. Like I said, I thought the TV series was really good. we enjoyed it anyway. And all the spin-offs that came from it, like Boba Fett, and seems like there was a couple more, or at least one more. Anyway, has anybody got anything fun going on the rest of this weekend? I don't know that we do. We'll probably, I guess it depends on how Brenda feels. We may be mowing the yard, or I'll be working out here. I gotta make another one of these, which you probably can't even see. Maybe you can. It's a round mesh screen that I've got to make a duplicate of, so that we can put it over our lights on our front porch so that the birds can't build a nest in it. And we can actually put our globes back on our lights and turn our lights on and use them. I heard it's like 4 Mando episodes in one. No great surprises. I think I've heard that too, Tina. Which I guess, I don't know. I guess that's not necessarily a good thing. Apparently, like I said, I've heard some people thought it was okay, but I've heard other people say it wasn't much good. So maybe our expectations are too high. Or maybe it just really didn't, meet the bar. But anyway, I don't know if Mark will be back next week. Like I said, he had graduations and birthday parties, and last night I talked to him. He said he had, what did he tell me? Yesterday he said he had 37 people at his house, I believe. June 6th today over the years. I don't know what that is. Let me see if that's right. He sent me something about Roy Clark. Maybe he sent me a text. I was going to get the number right, but I think he said he had 37 people at his house yesterday. And if you guys know anything about my friend Mark, is that he's not big on crowds, and that's a lot of people to be at his house at one time. Not to mention that he's trying to get some other things done. He's building a corral so he can train his horse, and help his granddaughters learn to ride, the ones that want to. Where do you go? I hate this. I got new text message thing on my phone, and I don't like it. I do not. There it is. I don't know where it's at. I don't know where he sent that to me at. Anyway, it was an email. Anyway, he said he had 37 people there yesterday. I don't know if they were staying all weekend or not. That's a lot of people in his house. I mean, Mark's got a nice house, but it ain't that big. What did John say? Leaving tomorrow on golf trip to northern New Jersey for 4 days. 12 guys, about 2 hours away, Crystal Springs Resort. Cool, John. I'm sure that's going to be fun. I'm sure you're going to have a great time. If you were looking for Star Wars canon, not so much. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, Tina. I think that's why a lot of people maybe not too keen on it. Do you think that Mark will flee to the mountains to get away? It is highly possible, Tina. I'll tell you what he will do probably. If he don't flee to the mountains, he'll get on his horse and ride off into the desert and toward the mountains. Or he'll get out and start training his horse. But I guarantee you, he will probably escape at some point. I don't know if any of you keep up with his Facebook, but he's building a corral or some kind of a round pen to train his horses in. He was working on that yesterday. Oh, and I don't know if you guys follow his daughter, but if you look up Caitlin Zorns, his daughter has a job this summer working for one of the rock quarries out there, who preserved fossils. They're in one of those areas where like every rock has a fossil in it. They're almost all fish. Let me see if I can pull that up. If I can, I will show it. I'll share it on the screen. But she found a really nice fossil the other day and brought it home, or got to bring. I'm not sure what the whole story is yet. Maybe she got to bring it home to show it off. I'm sure everything she has, she isn't hers to keep. Oh Lord, there are a lot of people at their house. Heavenly day. Oh, somebody's got a new puppy. Oh, and there's a big hornet's nest. My goodness, she's been busy posting pictures like crazy. All right, where's the ones I need to see? There she is with a handful of snakes. She's much like her father in that regard. Well, heck. Oh, there's a falcon on the ground. What in the world? Oh, a harrier. She found a mama harrier sitting on a nest. Oh, that is great. Okay, I'm gonna open this. At least I'm gonna try to. And share some of these pictures for a moment, in case you guys haven't ever seen any of her stuff. But this was the one where she found the there's one of her roosters. I'm gonna go back up. Everybody close your eyes for a minute. So this is something she went down the river. Kind of bird was nesting. It's a sandpiper or a willet, I think. I've seen her hanging out there. So she's, like I said, she's a lot like her dad. There goes the bird. That might be a willet of some sort. I don't know what all they've got there. They've got a lot of really cool birds out there right now. Here is someone at their house, and as you can see right in that upper left-hand picture, there are a lot of people hanging out there. And somebody's having corn on the cob. And there's grandkids akimbo. And that's one of the dogs that I've never met. Nor these folks I've never met, I don't think. Crap. Oh, they're crawdads. They're cooking crawdads. And I'm not sure if they're fishing or if they're pulling out the crawdad nest. Look at that crowd of people. Anyway, I was going to see if I could find her photograph. There's somebody's got a neat puppy. I like that puppy. That's what they call a cowboy corgi, I believe. That's a cross between a corgi, the little one here, cross between a corgi and a border collie, not a border collie, an Australian shepherd, which I think makes kind of a neat looking dog. And there is a great big hornet's nest. Man, that is a big one. She said the hornets looked angry even from a distance. Well, that's because hornets are always angry. I think they're just hatched angry. See, she's good at identifying moths and amphibians and beavers, or dogs are chasing the beavers. That's a picture of Hank, Mark's favorite cow dog. And here they are out in the river having a swim. Oh, a diving beetle. That's cool. Again, the puppies. And there's Caitlin with a handful of snakes. I'm teasing you about which one, Tina. I'm trying to find that picture. I really thought it would be the first thing up. I just saw it yesterday. A lot of frogs. There's one of her chickens. Now the pup. Frogs. There's that harrier. Look at that. They nest on the ground, and I've never seen one on the ground like that. That is really cool. That's Zoe. That's her oldest dog. Oh, wow. That's an interesting sky. Look at that line down the middle of that. Okay. I don't know where I saw that. There's the crawdads getting cleaned out. There's Sandpiper. More dogs. Hang on. I can't. Man, she has really been busy. Oh, great lightning pictures. Some of these are on sale if you look at her webpage, Stone Turtle. I believe it's stoneturtle.com. There's one of the owls that live in their willow trees in their front yard. There's Wolf Mark and his dog Wolfgang. That dog sat with me a lot when I was out there visiting last week. There's the mooses. That's winter. So I don't know where she posted that. Brenda and I both just saw it, but I don't know where it went. I don't know where she posted that at. So sorry. Anyway, if you look, I'd be willing to bet it's on her, like I said, stoneturtle.com. I believe. Let me look that up again so I can get that right in case anybody's. That's where my yellow jacket cup came from. I don't know if you guys have seen this one, but and now I can't see myself there. I know it looks like it's upside down, but it's actually not. That's the way she took the photograph. The yellow jacket, this monster right here, was on this piece of fruit right here. And I bought this from her and had it put on a cup. That's one of her photographs. She's probably closer to a yellow jacket than I ever want to get again. Mark has decided that yellow jackets may be his spirit animal. Anyway, that's one of her pictures. I was going to get her Facebook. If you go, I'll post the link. How about that? If you are ever interested, she's got some really neat photos. And this is her webpage. Yellow jacket. What did I say? Yellow jackets are not our friends. No, they are not. But they are what they are. Some spirit animals. Some of our spirit animals aren't always good. Sometimes they're the other side. Anyway, if you're interested, give her website a gander. You may find something you'd like. Like, for example, she's got some those pictures I just showed you with the lightning. She's got some really, really good ones that she's printed or can be printed. And I'm amazed at some of the stuff she does with what she uses. She takes almost all her stuff either on a phone or a tablet. She doesn't have a sophisticated 35 millimeter digital SLR or anything at this point. I'd wonder what she could do if she did, but she's really got a good eye, and she's artistic like her dad. She puts things together. Oh, there you go. Tina says she's got a 20% discount on your first order. So there you go. You can't hardly beat that. I bought Brenda a picture for Christmas. We got to get it mounted of one of the owls sitting in the front yard like the one I just showed you. And I've got this cup. And I want to say I've got something else from her. But I'm not sure about that. I can't believe I'll find that fish. You found a big fish. You know what? I bet I know where it is. Hang on, just bear with me just one more second. I bet her daddy posted that picture. Hey, that's where I saw it. Yes. All right, I'm going to show you this. I will show you this one, then I'll quit and let you guys go about your way and have a much more useful day than hanging out with me here. There. Bing. That's it. Look at that. Maybe that's not as impressive to everybody else as it is me, but I think it's really amazing. That's a pretty good size fossil. They find lots of these out there. They find some much bigger, and if you go to a quarry that's not maybe 10 miles away or a different one, they may have other kinds of creatures. Some of them have actual big dinosaurs. Depends on the geological time and the layer you're in, what you find out there. But right around Kimmerer, where the town, the big town where they live in Opal. But if you go to Kimmerer, the real town, um, there's 3 museums and gift shops there that all deal with fossils, different quarries, and she's working for one of them now, and they do this kind of stuff, and they find these, and then they clip them and make things you can display in your house, and of course they sell them, and but they also find a lot of cool big stuff, and she found this the other day, which I think's really neat. I'd be so excited I'd probably wet myself. Probably more information than anybody needs to know, but it's probably true. Anyway, guys, I'm gonna call it a day. I hope everybody has a great weekend. What's left of it. Uh, Hopefully, it won't rain all day on you, Tina. If that's what's still going. What do you mean? I learned a lot today. That's all. Oh, well, thank you, Tina. Tina, I appreciate that. I have to admit, you're one of my best fans. Uh, you always have something nice to say, and well, at least most of the time, as far as I know. But I do appreciate everybody showing up. I thought this was, even though I got the anniversary date wrong, when I realized that today was June 6th, I couldn't resist talking about D-Day. I mean, I don't get that. I hadn't had that opportunity before. Maybe in another 6 or 7 years I will. And but since it was D-Day, I thought I should take advantage of that and talk about it. And next time I'll get the anniversary date right. Anyway, guys, I hope you have a good weekend. I hope you have a great week between now and next weekend. I don't know what all we're getting into between now and then. I know that I'm going to have some more dental work done soon, so there is a possibility that I might not be on 1 or 2 weekends. Don't know those dates yet. I'm just guessing that that's going to be the case because I know I have to have it done, and I'm trying to get it done kind of fast because I'm supposed to go back to Wyoming in August with Dave and his buddy Shannon, or my buddy Shannon. Um, they're going fishing, and they want me to go with them because since I know Mark, and Mark knows the people, and he knows where the fish are, and that's where we're going. They're going after. I'm probably not going fishing. I'm probably just going to go hang out and take video. Which reminds me, I got to get busy and work on my GoPro because my GoPro quit while I was in this last trip. I got to find out what's wrong with it, and I just got a lot of things going on. Yeah, I'm a traveling man, all right. I'll tell you what, I came back, my tail was dragging. This last trip I made was bus truck plane back to here was a long one. And I don't think I got rested until I finally got home. And it took me a couple of days after that. Man, did I sleep like a log when I got here. Holy mackerel. I'm still sleeping pretty good. Um, so hopefully I'll be rested up before then. Um, in fact, I got to talk to them and get the airline ticket thing coordinated so we all get there at the same time or the same day or whatever. But this is going to be an airplane ride out there and back, so it won't be quite as long as driving or riding the bus. So that part's good. I'll be gone a week, but that when that happens in August, I'll miss 2 weekends because I'll have leaving here on a Saturday and coming home on a Sunday, I believe, is what they're trying to do. They're going out there to try to catch those fish, those cutthroat trout, and I'm just going because they've asked me to go along. So I'm going to try to do that. So anyway, guys, be safe, have fun, do something. Don't just work all day. Don't mow your yard, get out and sweat. Just do something fun at least part of the day, because I can guarantee you I'm going to. And I will see you guys again next week, hopefully, if nothing happens. If I'm not recovering from having teeth pulled or something. See you then, guys. So I'm going to hit end the stream, and then I'll wait.